Welcome to today's Vote Her In episode, featuring Ambassador Ertharin Cousin. Bi-weekly, this partnership between author and speaker Rebecca Sive and the Two Broads Talking Politics podcast shares with you stories of the movement to elect our first woman president and inspirational advice and strategy related to it. Hi everyone, I am Kelly Pollock, and you are listening to Vote Her In, a collaboration between the Two Broads Talking Politics podcast and author Rebecca Sive, where we discuss the movement to elect our first woman president, along with related issues like women in government and women's executive leadership. Joining me as always is Rebecca, who will introduce our guest today. Hi Rebecca.
Hi, Kelly. I'm glad to be with you again. It seems like we've been doing a lot lately, which I totally love. And I totally love being here today with my longtime girlfriend. We won't say how many decades. Ambassador to the world, but Ertharin to her pals, cousin, who has been a distinguished leader across the world. She's going to tell us more about that, but started right here in Chicago on the West Side. And we thought for our listeners it would be really great to start with Ertharin sharing some of her personal story, because it's pretty wonderful, and not pretty wonderful, it's wonderful.
Well, that's kind.
And then go from there and have this discussion about being an international leader of worthy causes and important efforts, as well as a local one. So here you are, and welcome.
Oh, Rebecca, thank you for that very generous introduction. And it's so good to be here with you, Kelly, as well. And I appreciate any opportunity to talk to women about women.
So tell us about, I was thinking about it, and as you know, I wrote about a little bit about your story of becoming a political leader in my first book, Every Day is Election Day, because I really, really wanted to say to women, we all can do this. It's sometimes hard, sometimes we win, we also lose. But if you could begin by just sort of sharing with us how you went from being a little girl on the West Side, and here you are, a big girl downtown, and downtown all over the world.
A quick story. I was in London. Serving as U.S. Ambassador, and had the honor to participate in an event at 10 Downing Street. Took pictures because it was the first time I'd ever actually gone through that door that says 10 Downing Street, and was getting on the subway headed back to the airport. And who do I run into at the airport in the subway? Reverend Jackson.
Oh my goodness!
And I run into Reverend Jesse Jackson, and this gets me to this story of who I am and where I started all of this.
Right.
And he looks at me. I have an entourage, literally, of people who have been working with me on this project, and they're from around the world. My team that was supporting me in the effort that we were working on that day, and he comes up out of the subway with his entourage, and he looks at me, and what does he say? West Side.
Absolutely.
And I look back at him and I say, always, always West Side. And he hugs me. And what that says is that, I grew up on the west side of the city of Chicago in Lawndale, in a neighborhood that nobody ever writes anything good about. But there are some great people who we could talk about who've come out of this neighborhood. We're still connected in different ways to the neighborhood. And was one of the young people in the neighborhood who attended Catholic school and was part of the Chicago Archdiocese busing program. And as a part of the Archdiocese busing program, I was the only, we were black 8th grade girls to graduate. Everyone else dropped out of the program. There was one male and one female who lasted to 8th grade. I was there from 6th to 8th grade, and then I went from there to Lane Tech High.
Right.
Where I was in the first class of girls to enter Lane Tech. After any longtime Chicagoan will know that the boys fought the gender integration of Lane Tech because it was one of those bastions of male superiority in sports, and they thought they'd lose that if they brought in girls. But I was in that first class of girls, and I was there for 4 years. Graduating from there, went on to Chicago, U of I at Chicago Circle campus.
Right.
Finished with a degree there in government affairs and criminal justice. And from there went to law school at the University of Georgia. You know, I say all of that as though it was smooth sailing. There was nothing smooth about it because, I was the oldest of 4 girls on the west side of the city of Chicago with a mother and father who were committed to the education of their children, but raising us in the heart of the hood. And despite their strong influence in their lives, when I was 18 years old, I was pregnant. And most people would say that should have been the end for me. That I was 17 when I became pregnant, 18 when my son was born. But because I had these parents who said, "What do you want to do?" And at that point, I wanted to get married. I was going to drop out of school and get married. And my parents said, "Do us a favor. Go to college for 1 year. We'll help you. Go, they made me work full time at the post office. I worked nights at the post office, went to college during the day. I was a freshman in college during the day, and took care of my son in between. And I did it for a year, and I realized there was a big old world out there.
Right.
That I could lead in.
So fast forward a few years, and we were talking about this earlier, there was I guess we're all now second wave feminists, something like that. And so sometime in the mid 80s or so, early 80s, when for those of you who may not know who he was, Harold Washington was elected mayor of Chicago, the first black mayor of Chicago. It was a revolution here, in case you're wondering how big a deal that was. And Ertharin and I and other women got together here, and we really started organizing politically on many of the same issues that women are still working on today. And for some of us, we stayed local. I would say I'm one of those. When the time came up, well, gee, do you want to come to Washington? I said, no, I'm staying here. But Ertharin then went on after a few years here to work for President Clinton. And then expanded her portfolio, particularly on the issues of hunger and food. Yes. And if you could just sort of fast forward from 92, say, to today, and how that developed. You know, you said it. We were women who believed we could change the world. And I look at young women today and say, unfortunately, we're still fighting the same fights. And we're fighting to protect what we thought we had already earned. And because of the work that we did and the relationships that were developed in 92, when Bill Clinton was elected president, we all worked on presidential campaigns here in Chicago at that point. And it was the first campaign we'd won. We'd lost a lot of presidential campaigns before that. He won. David Wilhelm was his campaign manager and then became chair of the DNC and offered me an opportunity to come to Washington to serve first as the research director for the DNC and then as deputy chief of staff. Went on from there to become the White House liaison for the State Department. I had studied international law with Dean Rusk. And because it was my avocation, I was always passionate, particularly about children and the law of the child and the human rights of women and children. So given the opportunity to go to serve as the president's representative in the State Department was quite fantastic. Did that for several years, and it was much like getting an LLM or a graduate degree in international law, because I was able to sit in on the meetings every day. I sat through
Black Hawk Down and Somalia, and all of those were the times when he was during his first term. After his second term, I came back home and got married. You remember that I was married for that short period of time.
I thought about it on the way. That was a hot minute, right?
That was a hot minute. She got married, and so I came back home and worked as vice president for Jewel Food Stores, doing. And I should say, just as a piece of background, and my family's always been involved in food. My dad owned restaurants. My grandmother owned restaurants. My grandfather was a farmer. We visited farms, visiting family as growing up, so always connected to food. So when I left to come back here to work for Jewel Food Stores, the Clinton administration appointed me to the BIFAD, the International Fund for Agricultural Development. So now it's like getting a graduate degree in agricultural development to go along with that international degree, while also working at a retail food store, learning everything about food systems and food transportation and the finances of food. I realized very quickly I was not made for inside corporate America,
right.
and became the executive vice president of what was then America's Second Harvest, which is now Feeding America, and that was at the time of Katrina.
Right.
And so I led our national philanthropic effort in response to Katrina. It was a sad period, but to see our country come together
right.
and have an opportunity to lead in that way. I thought I'd go out and start my own business and build public-private partnerships around issues related to food. And this guy named, who was our senator,
right.
named Barack Obama, met me at a party at Christmas and said, "Hey, I think I'm going to do this." I said, "Hey, if you do this, I'm there." And he did. He ran for president, and I became a senior advisor, one of the senior advisors. I was probably the seventh person on his campaign,
right.
And served as spokesperson to going to places that were never going to see Barack and Michelle, and spoke on their behalf all across the country. And I had worked for the Clintons, so it was very interesting times. And I made it very clear to my friends who were working for the Clintons, I was not opposed to her. I was just in support of him. And so we knew that at some point we were all going to come together.
Right.
And we elected him. We won again. And I was asked what I wanted to do. And
right.
the only thing that I wanted to do, because I'd served in Washington, was to serve as the U.S. Ambassador for Food and Agriculture. And he gave me that opportunity with her support. Right. And I was nominated by the president, confirmed by the Senate, and became Ambassador Ertharin Cousin, and represented the United States government before the Food and Agriculture Organization, the World Food Program, the International Fund for Agricultural Development, traveled around the world to support U.S. investment. The U.S. is the largest investor in the multilateral humanitarian and development food system.
Right.
And so serving as the representative for our taxpayers on how those dollars get spent for 3 years, and helping direct those programs. So that's what I did. And I did, in performing that work for 3 years, the opportunity to become the executive director of the World Food Program was put in front of me as a possibility, and the president, again with support from folks like Susan Rice and Samantha Power, said we want Ertharin, and they nominated me to Secretary General Ban Ki-moon. And I interviewed with him the day after Christmas, and he selected me. And I became the head of the world's largest humanitarian organization with 14,000 people serving 85 million people a year in 80 countries around the world, in some of the toughest places around the world.
So I will tell listeners, take a look on the internet after you listen to Ertharin here and get inspired. Look at some of the photographs of her work while she was at the World Food Program. I have to say, when I first realized the scope of it, I was kind of like sitting in my chair, holding on to it. But here you are,
here I am,
back at home, and Kelly, your thoughts, your questions of Ertharin?
Yeah, so, you've worked in the executive branch and worked as an executive. So one of the things we're always interested in talking about is, we have increasing numbers of women in legislatures, but still haven't had a head executive, a president who's a woman. So what are some of the the thoughts you have, the skills, the observations that you've made about, what a woman can bring to executive positions and what the women who are running for president or any sort of executive position need to be thinking about.
Sure. First of all, I believe we should have a woman president, but we won't have that conversation today. But I will tell you, I've had the opportunity to work with Angela Merkel, and to see a woman in that role where when she speaks, the world listens. And she speaks not just in her leadership capacity as the executive officer for Germany, but as the representative of women across the globe. And she understands that is her role and is comfortable in that space. And that's what is, when women are not afraid to express their I don't want to call it a vulnerability because it's not a vulnerability, but their strength that they bring to the office as a woman, but also recognizing that they represent the entire electorate. The world embraces that. Voters embrace it. And you look at the women who are running for president now, whether we're talking Kamala or Elizabeth Warren, we can name them all. But what I'm hoping that the electorate sees is that these are powerful, capable politicians who are women. And so the turning the narrative that she is a capable woman candidate to she is a capable candidate who is a woman. And the women presenting themselves in that way with that level of strength is what the voters want to see, what is compelling to them. Which is why people are saying now is the time. And are excited about it. I also, and I'll say something a bit controversial here, and would love to hear your feedback on it. But the only monolithic voting bloc remaining in the Democratic Party is African American women.
Exactly.
And that is taken for granted.
Right.
And not only must you run as any candidate, but I would say particularly to women, talk to the sisters, because they're the ones in this primary election who make the difference on Election Day.
So tell us what you think that Black women understand about the importance of this that other people are just not getting, at least so far.
And I won't say there's something that they understand that others aren't getting. I think that there's a certain set of values that the Democratic Party has stood for, and where others have become disenchanted because of the failure of our party to meet those values. Black women are still saying, this is still the best deal that we have going right now.
Right. I wrote about this in my book, Voter In.
Mm-hmm.
We certainly all talked about it in various contexts, and it's so perplexing. I think that's kind of a mild word. Why white women don't understand, or at least some white women, that the issues that these women candidates and the other Democratic candidates are putting forth are the issues they ought to vote on and support. And it seems like there's still a mountain to climb. And I wonder if you have any, insight on that, because if we're going to elect a woman president. In
Right.
fact, if we're going to elect a Democrat, women of various backgrounds are going to have to coalesce and vote Democratic.
Very much so. I see this around the world too often, unfortunately, where voters, period, particularly poor voters, tend to vote aspirationally as opposed to voting in their own self-interest.
Mm-hmm.
And we are not immune from that here in this country. And if you look at all the statistics around receipt of government benefits, support for impact of inequitable administration of government policies, and the impact that has on the poor of any race and of women of every race, and then compare and overlay the voting patterns against that. You know this data better than I do. You spend a lot more time with it, that people don't always vote in their own self-interest. And which is the question, and this is a conversation that those of us who think about these kinds of things need to engage in and talk to the campaigns about, is how do we better develop the narrative that will build the awareness amongst that base of voters that have moved away from the party, or that sat out the last primary and the last election, and the general even more so, to ensure that we can bring them back to identify the candidates. And the challenge, I say that, and that is one area of concern. The other area of concern is now when we have so many candidates.
Right.
The average voter, again, you know the data, again, is not focused on these issues in the way that we do. And so the multiplicity of opinions and candidates and voices and the impact that has on voter engagement.
I know Kelly's talked to a lot of different, on the course of the Two Broads podcast, a lot of different legislators on this matter of engagement. I'm wondering, Kelly, what your thoughts based on that with what Ertharin's had to say.
Yeah, no, I think part of it that I see is while there may be other groups that sort of intellectually understand what might happen if we don't have a Democrat in power, they're not as likely to face the consequences. Right. Like I hate that the current occupant of the White House is the president and, obviously didn't vote for him. But my individual personal life has not been that affected. I mean, it has in that I have become politically activated, but my day-to-day life, otherwise isn't as effective. And I think that it is extremely I was going to say unfortunate, and that's not a strong enough word at all. It's disheartening. It's problematic that more people aren't thinking about people other than themselves when they're voting, and realizing that not just voting, but whether or not they're voting, whether or not they're going out and getting involved and being activists, because I think at some level they know that the cost to them is not so great.
Mm-hmm. I appreciate that, but when we look at the 140 judges that he has appointed to lifetime appointments.
It affects all of us.
It affects all of us.
Every single one.
And we look at the dismantling of regulations in every department,
right,
from housing to education.
The environment.
And the environment. You look at what's happening with Title IX. I was just in a conversation yesterday in Washington about food labeling and food safety and the new food charts that are in process of being developed, the pilot programs for food access that have not been implemented by the USDA, and on and on and on. And you will quickly recognize that while we are focusing on the issues of the day with the tweets and the Congress,
right,
there is a shift that is happening in our government that will affect all of our lives.
right.
Yeah.
And unfortunately, and potentially the lives of our children.
Right.
Yeah,
Well,
absolutely.
I mean, it's clear that it will take years to reverse a number of these policies, right? Related to that, of course, there are women who've been mobilized to run for office. They ran, and many ran and won in 2018, many of whom are mothers. And you mentioned at the outset your own experience being both a mother and a professional woman, and a high-achieving one at that. Can you share some lessons learned, inspirational words for the moms who are listening who may be desirous of doing what you've done and becoming politically and civically active?
One of the best lessons that I unfortunately learned through experience that I hope I can pass on an advice and help other women avoid is the desire of too many of us to try to be everything all the time.
Right.
There's no reality to the superwoman who does it all alone. But there is the opportunity to do it all if you're willing to ask for help.
Right. A really good point.
And there's no shame in accepting help from friends and people who love you.
Right.
And surrounding yourself with a network of good girlfriends who babysit and make sure you don't have lipstick on your teeth. And and no, in all seriousness, who lighten the load.
Right. Right.
The opportunity to serve is just that. It is an opportunity to serve and to lead. That when given this gift, you embrace it and you do your best. But it's a myth that you can fry up the bacon, chop for the bacon, fry it up in a pan, and never make him forget he's a man. Remember that?
I do.
That's a myth. And too many of us try to live up to it.
Right.
I have so many friends who regret not having children.
That's, yes, in our generation, I was told at the outset of my career, you can either have a high-level career or you can have kids.
Right.
I absolutely was told that when I was at graduate school. And fast forward about 10 or 12 years, I don't think you and I have ever talked about this.
No.
I was asked to run for office, and I was told by people who shall remain nameless that I had to have children in order to be successful. Good statement. I know we're running out of time here, and we hope you'll come back.
I'd love to. And I hate that I went on too long. You asked when I haven't figured out a way yet of telling that story without making it so long. But I appreciate this opportunity because I have more of my career behind me than ahead of me. And at this point, one of my primary objectives is to make sure that there's an ocean of women.
Absolutely.
That come behind me and that I make that path a little smoother for them as they go.
Oh, I love that.
Well, thank you.
You're welcome.
It's a treat to be here. I don't know if you all can picture nodding heads. Kelly on one phone, over here.
You could hear my nodding.
That's exactly. We can hear you nodding with hugs to follow. So thank you again.
You're welcome.
And for our listeners, as I said, make sure you look at some of what Ertharin said and done and some amazing photos, and you too will be inspired.
The Vote Her In segment is a collaboration of Two Broads Talking Politics and author Rebecca Sive. Our theme song is called Are You Listening off of the album Elephant-Shaped Trees by the band Immunuri, and we're using it with permission of the band. Our logo and other original artwork is by Matthew Weflin and was created for use by this podcast. You can contact us at twobroadstalkingpolitics@gmail.com or on Twitter or Facebook at twobroadstalk. You can find all of our episodes at twobroadstalkingpolitics.com or anywhere podcasts are found.